one of the biggest challenges that companies face during the migration process, and that is the data integration and dealing with lots of data. Since research shows that on an average a business has 115 different applications, and sometimes they're not even connected to each other. So Cohen, I would like to ask you, how do you advise your clients in for this data discovery and data gathering process? How should they go about it?
There are tools that can help you with this. There are like tools that can do the data discovery and the whole data mapping, and they build a whole data catalog. But I think typically it's more than just tools. It's not just, oh, we're gonna buy tool X or tool Y and it's gonna solve all of this. You also need to combine with a data culture. So you need to have some data governance and some data management. So you're just not buying a tool. It certainly helps, and especially if you have a data catalog that you can browse and then you can see all of the properties of a certain data set or something. So it will certainly help, but it's just a tool that assists you. So you need to implement some data management and data governance strategy, and you need to try to involve as much people as you can, right? So you need to have some sort of culture shift sometimes, and then so to make sure, okay, it's everyone's responsibility, and maybe have some like data stewards that you can say, okay, you're responsible for this kind of area of the data, and the other data steward is responsible for that word area, so that you educate people, say, okay, we're not going to have data silos. And I'm not sure if you mean like we have many different sources, because it's the same on-prem or in the cloud. It's not going to change anything. The sources are sources. If you have data silos where you have like we have built different data marts, and they just do not integrate at all, and then we have like two dashboards who both display revenue, but they give a different number. That's a whole different problem. And that the last part you need to solve with like having a good data warehouse where everything is integrated and you have good data governance. All the other problem where you have lots of different sources that you can only solve by having like good data management strategy at the company level, where you also define upfront, okay, what is revenue? So I worked at an airline, and so they need to define all the exact timings. So when an airplane lands, so they have a timing when the plane first touches the ground, and then when it actually brakes and stops, and then when someone puts in the fuel hose and then starts unloading all of the baggage. So we had to do like a whole conceptual data model of these are all those timestamps, because if you don't do it, there's going to be a whole lot of discussion on every dashboard that you create, like, oh, what does this measure mean, or what does that timestamp mean? So you just need to like build a whole culture of data governance, data management. That's the old, and tools can assist, but I just cannot stress enough that tools are just tools.
So you basically need a culture, a mindset of managing that data. Kent, I was reading one of the articles on Snowflake's platform, and where it was a very interesting article in data fragmentation and data silos. And I was reading your experience in one of the companies where you were there to help them with their data, and nobody knew where the data was, and the same data was being copied into 2-3 data warehouses. So in such organization, what is your recommendation? How do companies go about gathering and discovering data in such circumstances?
Well, I mean, it goes back to something I said earlier on the planning, right? You have to know what you have, right? You've got to know, one, what's the business problem you're trying to solve, but you also have to know what you have. And that example that you're talking about that was mentioned in the article, I spent 3 months researching the data flows, because they had basically existing data marts that were siloed. And we did indeed discover that the same data was moving in multiple different directions and ending up in different places. But in a couple of cases, the same data was going into a data mart directly from the source, and it was going into that data mart from another data mart. So it had actually been transformed once already. And so the same data was going into one of the data marts twice, and nobody knew that. And that is the danger of the proliferation of data silos. And as we said before, that's why lift and shift is not is probably in almost all cases not the right answer, unless you are a small organization and you've got one little on-prem data warehouse and it's well known and well documented, okay, you can probably safely move that to the cloud. But if you have anything of any amount of complexity with multiple sources, like you said, about 115 sources on average, you really have to understand that map before you start the migration project, so that you make sure that you're only onboarding any piece of data just once. I mean, that's a data quality issue, right? Whether it gets transferred from two different sources using two different tools, or it's the same data is in there and is in fact duplicated, and maybe it's actually in two separate tables, but it's the same data. And you have to understand all of that before you can get a handle on providing good quality data to the business. And in many cases, that research may turn up things that the business doesn't even need anymore. Processes that have been running for 20 or 30 years, maybe coming out of an old COBOL system that has been superseded, that nobody ever turned it off. So just like Cohen's comment about billing alerts about going to the cloud, nobody ever has alerts about systems that are running that aren't even being used anymore, right? Because there was the server was paid for, and nobody was thinking about the cost of that, where you could actually go in and turn it off and nobody would notice. And that's part of the research and planning that you have to do in doing your assessment, is to make sure that you're not migrating things that don't need to be migrated. One of the Snowflake customers did do that. They discovered in the process of analyzing what they were doing in their current data warehouse was there was sources that they should not be using anymore that weren't actually active anymore, and that the data had all been superseded by a new source system. And so they were able to turn all of that off. If they'd done a big bang, they would have migrated all that code. And it was, of course, to Jay's point earlier, it was handwritten code. It was all handwritten code that nobody understood what it did. But had they not done the analysis, they would have migrated all that code to the cloud and really got no value out of it. It would have just been an expense.